we're going to find the zeros for this function right here. We are going to give their multiplicity for each of the zeros we find, and then we're going to state whether the graph crosses or bounces at each zero. So we go to the function here, and we're looking for zeros, okay, also called roots, and they're also the x-intercepts. So what you're doing is you're trying to find out what number would I plug in for x to get a 0 for this whole thing. So at this factor, x minus 2, what would I plug in here for the x to get a 0 right here? And the answer to that is 2. If I plugged in a 2, 2 minus 2 is 0, and then anything times 0 is 0. So one of my zeros, or one of my roots, is 2. Then you have to ask yourself, what would I plug in into this factor right here to get a 0? All right, and the answer to that is -1. Because if I did -1 plus 1, I would get 0. If I had a 0 here, 0 to the third is 0. Anything times 0 is 0. So my two zeros, my roots, are 2 and -1. Next, we have to give the multiplicity, and you're going to find the multiplicity just by looking at the exponents of the factors. So looking at this right here, what's the exponent here? How many times does x minus 2 happen? And the answer is 1. So the multiplicity of the root of 2 is 1. We look over here for our root of -1, and we look at this factor. How many times does this factor happen? And we see it's cubed, so the answer to that is 3 times. So the multiplicity of -1 is 3. Okay, and then they're asking to state whether the graph crosses or bounces at each 0. Okay, bounces, they also call this to touch and turn, and I know how to spell, and turn around. And if your multiplicity is odd, it will cross. So a multiplicity of 1 will cross, a multiplicity of 3 will cross. If your multiplicity is even, it will touch and turn around. And let me give you some quick examples of that. If you go back to some basic shapes that we know, like y equals x squared, we know that that touches right here and turns around. Okay, I call that bouncing. Right, notice the exponent of 2. And then let's look at x to the third, which is odd. And that one is not going to touch and turn around. It is going to cross. Let me draw that. I can do better. There we go. So the way that this question is worded can be a little confusing. They say, when they're asking about the multiplicity of the zeros, you would say that there are 2 zeros, right? Negative 1 and 2. And you're going to say that the multiplicity of the largest 0, that's right here, the largest 0, is 1. The multiplicity of the smallest 0 is 3. So it would have been better if they just asked us what's the multiplicity of 2, what's the multiplicity of -1, but we do know that 2 is larger than -1, so the multiplicity of the larger 0, in this case, is 1, and the multiplicity of the smaller 0 is -1. And what happens? Both of them cross.